Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Butterfly Princess Academy, where curiosity takes flight and wisdom wears wings. In today's lesson, we're going to be discussing an article by Betty Rubens. This article was published in the March 2025 edition of the BBC History magazine. Betty Rubens is one sec. Is a historian and author, and her new book, Listening: How Radio Changed the Home, is out now to buy. So there's going to be two parts to today's lesson. So part one, I'm going to be reading you this article that has been written by Betty Rubens, that has been published in the March 2025 edition of the BBC History magazine. And then I'm going to, part two of the lesson is going to be sort of analysis of the article, questions answered, rhetorical questions, and then a summing up. So here goes. 1 minute. How Britain found its frequency. When radio first appeared in British homes in the early 20th century, one thing soon became clear: domestic life would never be the same again. Betty Rubens tracks Britain's reaction to this extraordinary new technology via 7 cartoons. Radio silence. This double cartoon from 1923 limits the impact of the wireless on the art of conversation. Listening to the radio today is so familiar an occupation that we easily forget it was once a new technology. Like most new technologies, early radio stirred massive public excitement. What exactly was radio or wireless? And as it was then called. Who was it for? Where would it happen? It's the first ever form of home-based mass entertainment, and anxieties ran particularly high about radio's impact on the cherished traditions of domestic life. How, for example, might it affect conversations? Cartoons offer us a fascinating insight into how interwar Britons address questions like these. In the first panel of this before and after cartoon from 1923, guests at a Victorian dinner party are engaged in animated conversation. In the second, each of them is isolated in their own world. All interactions shifted as they listened to the radio. In the early days, problems with amplification meant that almost all listening was through headphones, making them the must-have accessory of the 1920s, just as they are again today. Even the butler is wearing a set, on the verge of a catastrophic as he stretches the wires to their full extent whilst carrying out his duties. These images represent a wealthy fictional gathering, but real-life versions were soon playing out in homes across the country. Radio uptake was sensationally swift. When broadcasting began in 1922, just 150,000 people were able to listen. By 1939, the number had risen to 34 million. Of course, such debates are not only a thing of the past, a forgotten feature of the lives of our grandparents and great-grandparents. Switch the gadgets to mobile devices, and this cartoon could easily be a commentary on the lost art of conversation at the 21st century family dinner table. Is it a telephone day? Many older Brits were utterly befounded by this strange new talking gadget in their homes, sitting wireless technology in 1896, but it would be more than a decade before the radio started making inroads with British homes. For many people, welcoming broadcasting into their domestic sphere could feel daunting, and attempts to understand how radio actually worked were often touchingly naive. Edith Davidson, wife of the Archbishop of Canterbury, inquired in 1923 whether it was necessary to leave a window open while listening to the wireless. In these first years, bad reputation didn't help. One disappointed early adopter in Sheffield compared the babble emerging from his radio as an insurrection in hell, and even when reception improved, older people often found the new technology daunting. Many cartoons depict them talking back to the radio, attempting to correct it, or scolding it for interrupting. The benign old auntie shown in the cartoon above, which appeared in Radio Times in 1923, confusedly believes that her set is an updated telephone, the new technology of her youth. Hovering at the door, her nephew represents the first ever wireless native generation, with such tech-savvy communication skills gaining currency. It makes sense to view the boy as a forerunner of teenagers who listen to music on transition in the 1950s and 60s. Early radio was soon enjoyed by all, including dear old aunties, but it was also beginning to play a role in the deeper generational shift. The babysitting service. Was radio leading young mothers astray? The creator of the 1923 cartoon, seemed to think it might be. Broadcasting was soon almost like a household utility. It provided a news service and regular weather forecasts, the Greenwich time signal, individualised SOS calls, live running sport commentaries, religious coverage, music, and talks on a vast range of subjects. It also proved company, as one housewife stated, "I know a woman who's lost her husband and she was all alone. And she says with the wireless on, she never feels lonely. It's like having someone else in the room." The Radio Times cartoon shown above, though rather more ambiguously in its message, a fashionably turned out woman is just leaving the nursery on the arm of her dear husband. At the last moment, she turns to give a final instruction to the nursemaid, who stands humbly next to her toddler charge. Let the little darling listen to Child's Hour, and then when he's had his supper, the radio dance band can play him to sleep. The woman's suggestion is clear. Listening to the radio can now replace more traditional forms of childcare. Below the image, the caption asks, "What is home without a radio?" This is a provocation play on the title of a familiar Victorian parlour song, "What is home without a mother?" But is it claiming that the new technology has become a welcome domestic resource, or slyly suggesting that it provides an excuse for mothers to to neglect their traditional household duties and go off dancing till dawn. The curse of casual sexism. Housewives benefited hugely from the radio revolution, yet the battle over misogyny hadn't been won. At a time when almost all married women stayed at home, daytime broadcasting proved a boom. One household wife from Manchester captured this in a 1929 letter to Radio Times. She described herself as bursting with mental energy, but obliged to stay close to work again household duties before declaring that the task of cleaning a kitchen went down a little better. While listening to the intelligent observations of an intelligent woman, a Bristol housewife explained that she would take her bowl of potatoes potatoes into the parlour in order to peel them to the accompaniment of the daily service. That half hour does me good. The 1929 general election was the first in which all women enjoyed the same voting rights as men. In preparation for this, a formidable female BBC editor and dedicated team of producers commissioned many talks on civic and political life. But even after equality had officially been won, casual sexism and deeply misogyny persisted, as numerous hilarious cartoons reveal. The image below builds an age-old truth about who is really in charge in the home. It appeared in October 1928, 3 months after the passing of the Equal Franchise Act, and is entitled How Laws Are Made. With breathtaking irony apparently lost on the editor and arts editor of Radio Times, who were both men. The text immediately above reminds listeners that an interesting series of Tuesday talks entitled Questions for Women Voters is to be continued at 7 p.m. on 6th of November by Professor Howard J. at the London Schools of Economics, whose subject will be How Laws Are Made. Music for the masses. The wireless transported working-class Britons to a gilded world they had little hope of inhabiting. With the manufacturers in overdrive, there was soon a wireless to suit every pocket. Only the super-rich could afford a ready-made set in a polished cabinet with its own amplifying horn. But a basic crystal set was within the reach of most working people. After buying an annual licence of 10 shillings, which could be paid by instalments into a savings club, there was no running cost, so day-to-day listening was free. However, democracy of access to broadcasting could not disguise the wide social and economic divisions in British society. The cartoon above appeared in Radio Times only weeks after the general strike. The great symbol of 1920s inequality, the scene is a large office furnished in the foreground, a painfully thin chairwoman has just pushed back the heavy carpet to clean the marble floor beneath. It is the look on her face that tells the story, a startled yet weary recognition of the audacity of the words she is hearing broadcast from a conspiracy lit up pricey radio set. We are now taking you over to the Savoy Hotel. Popular music played by the resident bands of grand metropolitan venues brought immense pleasure into millions of lives, but it might also awaken other emotions. For example, a headline in the Birmingham Dispatch announced crystal set ivory, Savoy Bank in Minter's Hotel, in Miner's Hovel. Radio broadcasting was increasingly playing a role in uniting the nation, but this cartoon is a poignant reminder that it might actually reinforce a sense of division between rich and poor. Royals in your living room. How should Brits behave in the presence of monarchy? Thanks to the radio, this question took on greater urgency. It was the year of the Three Kings in 1936. George V died, Edward VI abdicated, and George VI assumed the throne, all in 12 turbulent months for the royal family. The BBC covered all three events extensively, but bringing monarchy right into listeners' homes inevitably provoked new questions of etiquette. Was it necessary to stand for royal broadcast and the national anthem, as happened in cinemas and theatres? Was it permissible to eat and drink during the more solemn moments of the coronation? It would be a mistake to imagine that our listeners took such broadcasts as seriously as the sperm in the cartoon above, whose wife meekly questions the need for the family to behave as if actually in the presence of royalty. Real listeners to the coronation allow themselves to wonder about more mundane issues. What did the king and queen do for food all day? And how did the troops lining the routes of the procession relieve themselves? As one Londoner reported, we couldn't quite hear the words of the ceremony, and some of the phrases sounded like "God blimey" and "swell me bob." We all joined in mock interpretations, and there was much laughter. At the same time, a more submersive brand of radio comedy was gaining mass appeal. Programmes such as Brandwagon mocked the more solemn of broadcasting itself and played another immediate but virtual relationship, that of listeners in their homes and comedies in Broadcasting House. But this so-called comedy particularly suited in style of content to the medium, was as important as royal broadcasting in the coming of age as radio as an art form in its own right. The wireless goes to war. In 1939, radio truly came of age, relying world-shaking events to a nation battling for its survival. Less than a year before the outbreak of the Second World War, the equivalent cartoon above appeared in a special home number of Radio Times. It blends Broadcasting House with an image that is something of the modest suburban house, something of the cosy country cottage. Hens cluck in the yard, long johns flap on the washing line, a comfortable plump man strides home to his wife, who was waiting under it, above and behind home to his wife. Above and behind her, like behind it, stand the stages of aerial whistler climbs between curtain windows towards the iconic clock and rooftop transmitter. The text that appears below the cartoon stated that when all is said and done, broadcasting with all its elaborate machinery is aimed at the home. It also imparted the message that if wireless was consumed in the same way as theatre and cinema, i.e. outside the home, it might be grander, more imposing and more sophisticated. However, it would also be less intimate and friendly. Unharmishly romantic in flavour, this image represents the British way of life under threat. Skies are darkening overhead, war is coming, and the war would mark the end of the first phase of British radio and the beginning of the second, when the nation gathered round the wireless sets eager for information, education and entertainment. News was to prove the key offering. Just before the war, a Welsh grocer memorably commented, "The news is for me the very special feature. My wife releases me from the shop counter with the 6 o'clock news. I wouldn't miss the news. I've even neglected the baking machine for the news. Not even 20 years old and very far from perfect, the radio set has earned its place in the home." Now, that is the article by Betty Rubens that I've now read you. So now we're going to move on to part 2 of the lesson, which is an analysis, questions, answers to the questions, rhetorical questions, and then a summary up and close. So here goes. Title: The Wireless Revolution. Reception of radio technology in 1920s Britain through the lens of Betty Rubens analysis, and I've included some historical and cultural perspectives in this analysis. So, introduction. The 1920s marked a transformative era in British history, characterised by post-World War I recognition, reconstruction, technological innovation and shifting cultural pragmatisms. Among these developments, the advent of radio broadcasting emerged as a defining feature of the decade, reshaping domestic life, national identity and public discourse. In her March 2025 article for BBC History magazine, historian Betty Rubens examines the reception of radio technology in 1920s Britain, offering a lucid exploration of its historical significance and cultural ramifications. This part of the lesson synthesises Rubens' arguments situating the radio within the social political landscape of interwar Britain, while also analysing its dual role as a technology marvel and a cultural unifier. Historical context: the birth of British broadcasting. Rubens begins by culturalising the radio's introduction within the broader trajectory of British technological progress. Following the experimental wireless telegraph of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the 1920s saw the transition from military and maritime uses of radio to domestic entertainment. The establishment of the British Broadcasting Company, or otherwise known as the BBC, in 1922, under the leadership of John Reith, institutionalised radio as a public service. Rubens emphasised the strategic vision behind the BBC's founding, which aimed to avoid the commercial chaos of American radio by prioritising education, information and cultural uplift. Key milestones such as the first daily broadcast on the 14th of November 1922 and the expansion of transmission stations across the UK are highlighted as crucial to the radio's adaptation. Early receivers, including crystal sets and valve-operated devices, were initially expensive, limiting access to the affluent middle classes. However, Rubens notes that by 1925, technological advancements and reduced cost democratized ownership with over 2 million licensed sets by decade's end. Government interventions such as the Skies Committee 1923, and the Crawford Commission 1925 shaped regularity frameworks, culminating in the BBC's Royal Charter as a public cooperation in 1922. In 1927. These developments, Rubens argues, position the radio as a tool for national cohesion in a fragmented post-war society. Cultural reception, unity, class, and domesticity. Rubens' analysis pivots to the cultural dimensions of radio's integration, exploring how it redefined British domestic life. The wireless became a centrepiece of the home, fostering family cohesion through shared listening experiences. Programmes like Children's Hour and the Monday Night at 7 catered to diverse audiences, blending light entertainment and educational content. For working class families, the radio symbolised modernality and aspiration, offering access to high cultural, presumably confined to urban elites. Yet Rubin does not overlook these tensions inherent in the cultural shift. The BBC's pragmatic ethos, embodied by Reith's mantras to inform, educate, and entertain, draw criticism for its perceived eliteness. Regional accents were suppressed in favour of BBC English, a sterilised received pronunciation that marginalised dictatorial dialectal diversity. Rubin contends that this reflected broader anxieties about social stratification as the radio bridged and reinforced class divides. Urban-rural further complicated reception, while cities like London and Manchester enjoyed robust signal coverage, rural areas faced technical limitations, exuberating feelings of isolation. Rubin cites listeners' letters archived by the BBC, where rural inhabitants expressed both gratitude and frustration over intermittent service, a reminder of the unevenness of technological progress. Resistance and critique, challenges to the wireless age. Despite its popularity, the radio faced scepticism from traditionalists. Rubens details how moral guardians feared the erosion of communal practices such as pub sing-alongs and music hall attendance as families retreating into privileged listening. Religious groups decried Sunday programming as while intellectuals like Bertrand Russell limited the positivity of radio consumption. Gender dynamics also influence reception. Rubin highlights how radio advertising targeted women as primary consumers, framing the diverse as a labour-saving companion for homemakers. Yet this reinforced practical norms. Women listening habits were often policed to prioritise domestic duties over leisure. Convert feminist groups utilised radio to amplify suffrage discourse, illustrating the medium's paradoxical role in both constraining and empowering women. National identity in the imagined community. A central thesis in Rubin's work is the radio's role in forging a cohesive British identity. By broadcasting events such as the 1926 General Strike and King George VI Christmas Message, the BBC Fifth Christmas Message, the BBC created a shared national narrative. Rubens draws on Benedict Anderson's concept of imagined community arguing that radio allowed geographically dispersed citizens to participate in collective experiences from sporting events to royal ceremonies. This unification had political undertones. During the general night strike, the BBC's portrayal of events as a threat to social order aligned with government interests, showcasing radio's potential as a tool for state propaganda. However, Rubens also acknowledges the grassroots documentations of information as listeners gained unprecedented access to news and political debates. Legacy and conclusion. Rubens concluded by reflecting on the radio's enduring legacy by the 1930s. It had cemented its place as a cornerstone of British culture, paving the way for television and digital media. Its introduction in the 1920s not only revolutionised communication, but also redefined the boundaries between public and private life, tradition and modernity. In synthesizing historical and cultural perspectives, Rubens' analysis underscores the radio dual identity, a symbol of progress that both mirrors the migrating pretensions of interwar Britain as contemporary society grapples with the implications of AI and social media. Her examination of 1920s radio receptions offers a poignant reminder of technology's power to shape and be shaped by the cultural currents of its time. So that's the analysis. I'm now going to read you some 15 questions about the article. So question 1. How did the establishment of the BBC in 1922 reflect broader British social values in the post-World War I era, particularly in contrast to the communications of American radio? Question 2. In what ways did government interventions such as the Skies and Crawford committees shape the ethnical and operational frameworks of early British broadcasting? Question 3. Rubens argues that radio ownership transitioned from a middle-class luxury to a democratized technology by 1925. What economic and technological factors enabled this shift, and how did it alter social dynamics? Question 4. How did the BBC's emphasis on cultural uplift of received RP reinforce class hierarchies, even as radio aimed to unify the nation? Rubens highlights the tensions between urban and rural experiences of radios. How did discrepancies in signal coverage and programming reflect wider social inequalities in interwar Britain? Analyse the gender portrayal of radio in 1920s Britain. What did advertising? Why did advertisers target women as primary consumers, and how did this both empower and constrain female listeners? Critiques like Bertrand Russell argued that radio fostered passive consumption of culture. To what extent does Rubens' analysis support or challenge this critique? How did religious and moral objections to Sunday programming reveal broader anxieties about morality in 1920s Britain? Rubens cites listeners' letters to the BBC as evidence of public reception. What are the strengths and limitations of using such sources to understand historical attitudes towards technology. Drawing on Benedict Anderson's concept of imagined community, how did royal broadcasters broadcast, for example, royal speeches or coverage of the general strike, strengthen a collective British identity? During the 1926 general strike, the BBC was accused of acting as a government mouthpiece. How did this event illustrate the dual role of radio as both a public service and a tool for political propaganda? In what ways did regional programming attempts or lack therefore challenge the BBC's goal of national unity? Rubens suggests the 1920s radio laid the groundwork for modern media. What parallels can be drawn between the reception of radio in the 1920s and the social responses to digital technologies like social media today? How might the BBC principle of inform, educate and entertain be reinterpreted or critiqued in the context of 21st century media landscapes? If Rubin were to analyse other transformative technology, for example television or the internet, what methodological frameworks from her radio study might she apply and why? How does Rubin's analysis align with or diverge from earlier historians like Asa Bridge or Paggy in interpreting the social impact of earlier broadcasting? To what extent can the reception of radio in 1920s Britain be viewed as a microcosm of global technological adaptation in the interwar period? How might Marxist or feminist lens critique Rubin's emphasis on national unity and class bridging? So these are the questions, and now here are answers to the questions. Question 1. BBC's establishment post-World War I. The BBC, founded in 1922, reflected Britain's post-war emphasis on unity and moral rebuilding. Unlike America's commercial radio, the BBC's public service ethos under John Reith prioritised education and cultural coercion, mirroring social desires to heal class divides and foster national identity after the trauma of war. Question 2. Skies and Crawford Committee. These committees institutionalised the BBC as a public money play, ensuring it operated under a mandate to serve the national interest rather than profit. They established ethnical frameworks like balanced programming and political neutrality, shaping the BBC's identity as a trusted institution. Question 3. Radio 1923-5. Cheaper value radios, mass production and instalment plans make ownership accessible. Socially, radio bridge class divides by exposing working class audiences to high culture, while also creating shared national experiences through events such as royal broadcasts. Question 4. BBC's cultural uplift and class by programme civilised received pronunciation and elite cultural content. For example, classical music and literature. The BBC reinforced middle class dominance while aiming to unify it, marginalised regional dialects and working class tastes, perpetrating subtle hierarchies. urban rural areas face poor signal coverage and limited programming, reflecting broader interwar neglect of the countryside. Infrastructure, urban-centered broadcasts exhibit feelings of isolation, highlighting inequalities in access to modernity. General of radio advertisers targeting women as homemakers, framing radio as a tool for domestic efficiency. For example, cooking shows. This reinforced practical partial norms, but also empowered women by providing entertainment and educational content within their domestic sphere. Passive consumption critique. Rubens acknowledges radio's passive aspects, for example, families listening silently, but counters the programming like children's hour encourage interactive family discussions, blending passive and active engagement. Religious objections to Sunday programming. Critics viewed Sunday broadcasts as undermining Sabbath traditions, reflecting fears that morality eroded religious and communal practices. This mirrored broader anxieties in scrutinisation and individualism. Listener letters to sources strengths include capturing individual voices, for example, rural listeners, graduates, and frustration. Limitations include bias towards opinionated segments of society, potentially overlooking silent majorities. Imagine community via radio national events like the King's Christmas speech, creating collective experiencing, fostering a sense of shared British identity among disappeared listeners per Anderson's theory. BBC in the 1926 general strike. The BBC pro-government coverage during the strike showcased its role as a propaganda tool, yet its framing as neutral public servicing masked this bias, revealing tensions between registering ideas and state influence. Regional programming challenges. The BBC's centralised model minimised reasonable content, aligning alienating areas like Scotland and Wales. This undermined national unity by neglecting local identities, prompting later calls for regional stations. 1920s radio versus modern digital tech. Both technologies face access inequality and debates over content control. Radio parallels social media's rise through the latter's corporate algorithms, contrast with the BBC's public service model. Principles. Today's critics argue inform, educate, entertain is elitist in a digital age. However, public broadcasters like the BBC still balance these ideas with demands for diversity interactively. For example, podcast user-generated content. Frameworks Rubin might analyse the internet through lenses of access, dispute, cultural and political policy regulations akin to her radio study. For example, comparing the BBC's ethos to net neutrality debates. Rubens versus Briggs focused on institutional BBC history but emphasised daily listener habits. Rubens diverges by intellect cultural theory, for example, Anderson and gender class analysis, offering a more approach. My criticism: Britain's public service model was unique, but radio's role in shaping national identity parallel trends in Germany. In Germany's and the US commercial networks. The interwar period globally saw radio as both unifying and diverse. Marxist critique. Feminist Marxists might argue Rubens overlooks how radio served shifting work during the general strike. Feminists could critique her limited exploration of radio's role in challenging general norms beyond democracy. So I've come up now with 12 rhetorical questions, and then I'll read them out and then provide some insights. So question 1. Can a technology designed to unify the nation ever truly escape the bias and hierarchies of the society that created it? If radio democratized access to culture, why did its cultural uplift project feel like oppression to those whose voices it silenced? When a new technology enters the home, does it reshape society or merely amplify the contradictions already buried beneath it? Was the BBC's written version of educating the masses ennobling engagement together or assertion of an elite authority over working class taste? Can scandalisation of language, content or values ever be anything but a tool of cultural domination? If the radio bridged class divides by exposing all Britons to the same broadcast, did it also flatten the richness of regional identities of Britishness? Did the radio empower women by bridging the gap, by bringing the world into their kitchen, or did it chain them further to the expectations of domestic servitude? Can a technology marketed as a household appliance ever transcend the gender constraints of advertising? Does a shared broadcast create unity or merely the illusion of it? When the BBC claimed neutrality during the general strike, was it upholding public trust or digesting state propaganda as objectively? Can a nation truly listen to itself if only certain voices are broadcast in proper accents? If 1920s Britain radio feared radio would erode community, what might they say about our world of smartphones and algorithmic isolation, and would they be wrong? So here it is, some insights. Can a technology designed to unify a nation ever truly escape the bite? So question 1's insight. The BBC's mission to unify Britain through radio was inherently shaped by the elite's vision of proper culture, for example, received pronunciation, classical music. This reflects how technologies are never neutral. They mirror and magnify the values and prejudice of their creators. Today, social media algorithms similarly claim neutrality while reinforcing social biases. Question 2. Insights. The BBC's top-down cultural uplift privileged elites, taste dismissing working class and regional cultures as vulgar. This paradox acts as well, while imposing hierarchy reveals how technologies can democratize participation without democratizing power. Question 3. Insights. Radio didn't create Britain's class divides or gender norms, it intensified them. For example, it gendered marketing a housewife's companion reinforced domestic roles with its regional signal gaps mirrored pre-existing urban-rural inequalities. Question 4 inside. Rhythm's ideals were rooted in the belief that the masses needed improvement by enlightened elites. This echoes colonial civilizing missions, where power is framed as benevolence. Modern parallels exist in debates over cultural digital content to protect users. In question 5, insights. The BBC's enforcement of RP and suppression of dialects mirrored state efforts to harmonise national identity. Often erased marginal voices are seen today in debates over standard English in education versus multicultural linguistic diversity. Question 6, insights. Centralised broadcasting diluting regional cultures, e.g. Gaelic progress. For example, Scots Gaelic programming was rare, privileging London-centric narratives. This tension between unity and diversity persists in modern media, where global platforms often arrange local simplicity. Question 7, insights. Radio offered women access to public discourse, for example, suffragette debates, but confined their engagement to the home. This duality mirrors modern tech smartphones empower women with information, yet tether them to unpaid emotional labour. For example, family coordination. 8, insights. Gendered marketing shapes user behaviour. Radio's framing as a domestic tool limited its conclusion as a political or public medium for women. Similarly, pink tech, for example, skincare gadgets, often restricts women's tech engagement stereotypical roles. Now, question 9, insight. Shared experiences like the King's Christmas speech foster national cohesion, but mask deeper fractions. For example, class regionalism. For example, modern viral moments, for example, World Cup wins, similarly create fleeting unity without addressing systematic divides. Question 10, insight. The BBC's coverage framed the strike as a threat to order, aligning with government interests. This illustrates how institutions claiming neutrality often serve power structures. A critique now levied at algorithms claiming curation. Question 11, insight. The BBC's linguistic hierarchy excluded working class and colonial voices, constructing a narrow British identity. Today, similar evasions occurs when media platforms prioritise dominant languages or dialects. So question 12, insights. Critiques of 1920s radio feared its erosion of community. Modern tech, despite its connective promises, has deepened isolation. For example, doom scrolling alone. This suggests a recurring pattern. New technologies disrupts old communal bonds, but fails to fulfil their utopian promises. Final thoughts. The story of radio in 1920s Britain is distracted by Betty Rubens. It's not merely historical curiosity, but a cautionary mirror for our digital age. The wireless revolution embodied a paradox. It unified a fractured nation through shared broadcast, while amplifying the very divisions, class, gender, religionism it sought to bridge. The BBC's rhythm ethos, with its noble ambition to inform, educate, and entertain, became both a beacon of cultural and a tool of elitism, privileging certain voices and tastes over others. Radio reshaped domestic life, offering women a window to a world while reinforcing their confinement to the home. It promised national unity, yet exposed the fragility of the ideal during crises like the national strike. As we grapple with today's technologies, social media echo chambers, AI's opaque algorithms, and the metaverse's virtual frontiers, the lessons of the 1920s resonate. All technologies are born in societies already driven by power structures, and their adaptation is never neutral. They can uplift or oppress, connect or isolate, or dominate depending on who controls their narratives. Quotes to carry forward. John Reith, BBC's first Director General. He who prides himself on giving what he thinks the public wants is often creating a functionist demand for lower standards. A reminder that the gatekeepers of technology and media must balance intervention with ethical responsibility, resisting the temptation to equate popularity and quality. Benedict Anderson on Imagined Communities. The media created unified fields of exchange and communications, forging nations where none existed before. Relevance highlights the dual role of media, fostering collective identity while eroding marginal voices. Neil Patterson, media theorist, technology giveth and technology taketh away. It is never a one-sided affair. Relevance, a timeless lens for asserting interventions from radio to AI as double-edged tools. Betty Rubens, the radio did not invent Britain's diversions, it broadcast them into every living room, forcing a nation to hear its own contradictions. Relevance, technology exposes social fractions as much as they paper over them. Closing reflection. The 1920s radio era teaches us that technological progress is not a line of march towards utopia, but a contested terrain where power, culture, and resistance collide. As we navigate today's disruptions, algorithms, biases, digital divides, and the configuration of attention, we might ask, are we repeating the past mistakes, or can we forge a path where technology truly serves the many, not the few? The answer lies not in the tools themselves, but in how we choose to widen them. In the words of William Gibson, the future is already here, it is just not evenly distributed. May we distribute it more wisely than our predecessors. And that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, concludes today's lesson at the Butterfly Princess Academy. Thank you for tuning in to today's lesson. I have been your tutor, the Butterfly Princess, and remember, at the Butterfly Princess Academy, it's always the case where it is always the case where curiosity takes flight and wisdom wears wings. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time for the next lesson here at the Butterfly Princess Academy. Thank you, take care, bye for now, and I'll see you very soon. Bye bye.